So I'm going to go through today and talk to you about my 5 key points of building a healthy soil. The first is the least amount of mechanical disturbance possible. And I'm doing that in a no-till situation. I realize organic producers are going to till some, just make your tillage minimal. This slide was put together and it really illustrates the destruction of tillage. This farmer had a forested area and he cleared part of that area, farmed it, intensive tillage, monoculture soybeans for 17 years. And look what happened. That's a picture of the forested area, soils, and then the field that he cleared. What you see is a decrease in organic matter from 4.3 down to 1.6% with 17 years of tillage. I wish I would have had the foresight back in 1991 when I bought that place to archive some of the soils, because I'll guarantee you they look like the soils on your right there. They were compacted, there was no life in them. As I said, we were down to less than 2% organic matter. We had taken the life out of those soils. No-till is a big part of that. And no-till will work anywhere in the world there's production agriculture. I've seen it. It works, and it's key to building healthy soils. The other thing that's key is to take advantage of the natural things that occur in healthy soils, untilled soils. And one of those is mycorrhizal fungi. And I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to get real in-depth with that. But we don't take advantage of the natural processes that occur in our soil. Mycorrhizal fungi will form a symbiotic relationship with the roots. And what it more or less is doing is it's extending the system, the root network of that plant. So that plant is able to gather and store nutrients and water from a much bigger area. Well, when we till, we destroy this. If we have untilled soils and promote healthy soils, we're going to get more mycorrhizal fungi, and we're going to be able to take advantage of that. And I'll show you some pictures coming up of just how important that is. The other thing mycorrhizal fungi can do, when it gets into that host plant's roots, it'll prevent pathogens and nematodes from entering that root cell wall. So we can actually decrease the amount of fungicides, etc., that we have to put on our crops because we're taking advantage of this natural ecosystem process. The other thing mycorrhizal fungi does is it starts soil formation. Think back to that picture I showed there with the 17 years of tillage in soybeans. There's no soil aggregates in that picture. The soil aggregates are being destroyed. Mycorrhizal fungi secretes a glue called glomalin, and that glomalin then is the sticky substance that starts soil formation. So the picture on the left there, that's soil particles being formed due to the glomalin secreted by mycorrhizal fungi. Here's what some of our soils look like today. After 21 years of no-till and everything else I'm going to talk to you about today, but notice that soil aggregation. That's what we want soils to look like. Soils should look like black cottage cheese, full of carbon, full of pore spaces, and that aggregation. Mycorrhizal fungi do a lot of things. They improve aggregate stability, they build soil carbon, they improve the water use efficiency, and they increase the efficiency of nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. And if we're adding especially phosphorus to our farming practices, that's actually detrimental to mycorrhizal fungi. Ways to increase it: reduce or eliminate chemical use, reduce or eliminate tillage, reduce or eliminate synthetic fertilizers, and you have a living plant root in the ground as long as possible. These are things we can accomplish both in our perennial systems and in our annual cropping systems. It can be done, and I'm going to show you how we've done that. In 2003, I was fortunate, Dr. Chris Nichols there, she did some of the original work when glomalin was discovered by Dr. Sarah Wright. She was a grad student under Dr. Sarah Wright. Dr. Nichols came to the ARS lab in Mandan, North Dakota. In 2003, she came out to my place, looked at what I was doing, and she said, "Gabe, you've come a long ways, but your soils will never be sustainable unless you remove your synthetic fertilizer inputs." And I thought, wow, how can I farm without synthetic fertilizer? So for the next 4 years, we did split trials on our operation. We took fields and half the field would use synthetic fertilizer, the other half we wouldn't. All 4 years, the non-fertilized tracts were equal to or greater in yield than the fertilized tracts. So we haven't used any synthetic fertilizers on our operation since 2008. How has that affected our yield? Our yields are over 25% higher than the county average. Am I the highest in the county? No. Am I the most profitable? Yes. Simple as that. But you have to get your soils healthy first. And I'm in no way standing here to tell you to immediately eliminate synthetic fertilizer. You're going to have a disaster if you do. You need to, it's like a drug addict. You need to wean it off slowly. But once you build that population of soil biology, build that healthy mycorrhizal fungi population, you will be able to drastically reduce your synthetic fertilizer inputs. Okay, the second principle of a healthy soil is armor on the soil surface. Look at perennial native range, always covered all the time. Bare soil is a detriment to soil health. I think back to my father-in-law telling me the more you work the soil, the better it is. That is not the way nature works. Where in nature do you find bare soil? Only where there was a catastrophic event or where man imposed his will on it. This is what happens when we till. This is eastern Colorado just this past January. You'd think it was back out of the 30s and out of the Dust Bowl. Not so. You would have thought we would have learned something in the past 80 plus years. Evidently we haven't. Last Father's Day, my son said, "Dad, for Father's Day, I'm going to take you. They're having a soil health tour." This is what we took a picture of on that soil health tour. It was an operation with tillage. I don't see much soil health in that photo. This is what it looks like on our operation. That's a seeded field. We want armor on the soil surface. We want that soil covered at all times. Here's a cover crop emerging through that armor on the surface. How are weeds going to germinate there? I'm able to save on herbicides because we have that armor. Weeds aren't going to germinate through that, but the crop does just fine. That residue also buffers our heat. Now, we can get hot, not as hot as you get here in southern Idaho, but we can get pretty hot in August. That heat is detrimental to soil life. Here we had a tour out on our place, and we stuck this thermometer in on your left. That's where the cover crop is. It was almost 100 degrees outside that day, and that thermometer registered 87.6 degrees. On bare soil, 107 degrees. That 20-degree temperature difference is huge. What's the effect of temperature on soil life and on plant growth? At 70-degree soil temp, 100% of the moisture is used for growth. Once we get to 100 degrees, only 15% of that is used for plant growth. So go back to this photo. In other words, if I don't have armor on the soil surface, my plants aren't going to produce. They're not going to grow anymore. But where I have armor, I'm still getting growth out of my plants. That equates to dollars in my pocket. If we get much hotter than that, we start affecting soil biology. And soil biology is the key driver for the nutrient cycle that's going to provide our plants the nutrients. We need to keep those soil temperatures down. The other thing is you have armor on the soil surface and you'll have this. You'll have a lot of biology. There's more microorganisms in a teaspoonful of healthy soil than there are people on this world. Think about that. Yet how often as producers do we think about feeding that soil biology? How often do we think about protecting it, keeping armor on the soil surface? We need to do that. That's the residue brushed away in the cover crop. I know it's hard to see here, but that's solid earthworm castings. When we bought that farm in 1991, I tell people I could never take a day off and go fishing because you wouldn't find an earthworm on the whole farm. Last spring, we did earthworm counts. 12 inches, 2 inches deep. We were averaging over 60. That's a lot of earthworms. I never transplanted any, didn't bring any in. They came on their own. Build it and they will come, but you have to provide the home for them first. Third principle of building a healthy soil is diversity. Look at true native rangeland. This photo here is from one of our native rangeland pastures. And I tell people I bought that land a number of years ago. I bought it for two reasons. Number one, because it was true, healthy native range that hadn't been disturbed. My son teaches range management at the local community college. He brought his class out to this particular paddock, and in 2 hours, they counted over 140 different species of grasses, forbs, and legumes. That's diversity. If we have that type of diversity in a healthy native range, why don't we have it on our cropland? The other reason I bought this pasture was simply because with that many rocks, I'd never be tempted to break it up. In 2006, I had the opportunity to speak at a conference, and this gentleman was there, Dr. Ademir Caligari from Brazil. Dr. Caligari is the world's foremost authority on cover crops. He works for the United Nations, traveling all over the world. He's worked in 65 different countries. And he said two things to me at that conference that really stuck out. He said, you give me 2 inches of rainfall a year, 200 inches, or anywhere in between, and I can grow you a cover crop. Well, that told me I can do it in my drier environment. The other thing he said is that cover crops are meant to be seeded in multi-species combinations. And I got thinking, duh, I've been using these 2- and 3-way mixes. Dr. Caligari was talking about 7- and 8- and 10-way mixes. Think back to those native perennial ecosystems. What do you find? You find tremendous diversity. I needed to get that into my cropland. So at that time, I was on the local soil conservation district board, and we had some plot land located only a mile south of my farm. And we decided to test Dr. Caligari's wisdom there. And we were going to take and seed monoculture cover crops, strips of them, and then at the end would mix all these species together and seed a diverse polyculture and see what happened. Now, that winter was extremely dry in North Dakota. We didn't have a lot of snow. So we seeded these monocultures and this polyculture into very dry seed bed in the middle of May. These photos then, here's the plot with the cover crop growing. These photos were taken July 31st. We had less than an inch of rain on these crops. You can see the monoculture of turnips was dead. These were about approximately an acre plot each. Then you move over to the next acre, and there was the radish. That was dried up and dead. And you keep going down the line until you get to the diverse polyculture. Same soils, same seeding date, everything was the same. Look at the difference. Amazing. And that was about a 10 species mix. In other words, here they clipped it. We over tripled dry matter forage production where we had the multi-species combination. So what's happening? How can that be? For all our lives, we've been told that you have to seed these monocultures, otherwise it's going to compete for moisture. That's not the way nature works. Dr. Nichols explained it best. Not only do the fungi, and she's talking about the mycorrhizal fungi, provide for the needs of one plant, but the fungal hyphae pipeline connect to multiple plants, thus supplying the nutrition and moisture requirements of all the plants. So in other words, if we would seed multi-species, that mycorrhizal fungi is going to transfer nutrients, and it's going to be a benefit to all the plants. Think of it this way, the rooting systems, the roots on different plants, they have different root types, different root depths. They're bringing nutrients and moisture from different areas of the soil profile. I spent a lot of my time talking in the Midwest, and this is what I see in the Midwest. Monoculture of corn, monoculture of beans. Remember this photo. What happens to soils under monocultures? Monocultures are a detriment to soil health. There is no doubt about it. If they weren't, then why in nature don't we find monocultures? So this is what it's evolved to, and I'm jumping ahead. I didn't get to this point overnight. It took a lot of years of trial and error. My son and I have a few sayings on our operation. One of them is that we want to fail every year. If we don't fail at something, we're not trying enough new things. So I've tried hundreds of different combinations over the years, but we've gotten to the point where we no longer seed monocultures. In the upper left there, that's oats with clover growing in it, cool season grass. Upper right is a mix of cool season broadleaves sown as a polyculture. The lower left, that's corn with hairy vetch in it, warm season grass along with a cool season legume. And in the lower right, that's actually sunflowers, warm season broadleaf, with over 20 species of cover crops growing with it. We're trying to mimic nature. We don't do monocultures anymore on our operation. I mentioned we have 2,000 acres of cropland on our operation. We try and get a cover crop on all 2,000 acres every year, either before a cash crop, along with a cash crop, like this case, or occasionally after the cash crop. But we want something growing at all time. Here's a close-up picture of that oats. We no longer use any synthetic fertilizers, as I mentioned. We haven't used pesticides or fungicides since before the turn of the century. There's no need when you get a healthy soil. Nature will take care of those symptoms if you allow her to. Here's what it looks like close up. We seeded 3 types of clover along with the oats. We can typically get our yields of oats are in the 95 to 115 bushels without fertilizer. And when you're talking our land values, that's pretty profitable. We can make significant profit at that. The beauty of it is we straight combine the oats off. We got that living cover. All those legumes just explode, fixed nitrogen, can provide grazing for our livestock if we so desire. The fourth principle, living root in the ground as long as possible. That's where cover crops come in. And I think of cover crops as a diverse mix that enhances the life and the function of the soil, because we're really feeding all that soil biology. We're promoting that mycorrhizal fungi. You use cover crops to design them for what you don't have. You know, there's a big cover crop craze going on throughout the country. And I've seen a lot of disasters with cover crops because people don't plan properly. What are you trying to accomplish with that cover crop? Are you trying to increase organic matter? Are you trying to put armor on the soil surface? Are you trying to improve water infiltration? And the list goes on and on. But before you start planting cover crops, you have to decide and determine, what's my resource concern? What is it I'm trying to do? We have 2,000 acres of cropland. I honestly don't know how many fields. I haven't added it up. But we design cover crop mixes specifically for each field, because the resource concern will usually vary from field to field. So, for instance, if you have the resource concern of a compaction layer, then you're going to use cover crops such as this is a daikon radish. And if you look down in that soil profile, there was a compaction layer down about 12 inches. Notice that radish? It tried growing down in the ground, hit that compaction layer, it comes back above ground till it gets enough energy to poke its way through. Radishes are also a nitrogen storage tank, so we use them in combination with legumes to sequester and store nitrogen for the next crop then. That's my fertilizer storage tank right there. These radishes can get really large if you grow them, seed them a little later in the year. If you seed them in the spring, they're going to bolt and shoot a seed head and they won't produce that big tuber. But they can get really big. This system that I'm talking with you about today can take place anywhere in the country. And I've got producers all over the world that are using this model, and Joel will talk about it later today too, to produce a healthy ecosystem. This picture is of David Brandt, a friend of mine near Columbus, Ohio. David has been a no-tiller since 72, cover crop since 78. 2011 here, 225 bushel corn, 0. Synthetic inputs, 0 herbicides, 0 pesticides, 0 fungicides. That's profitable. David likes to brag about the big radishes he grows. Him and I always have a contest, so I brag about my turnips. This is a partial list of the cover crops we grew on our ranch here this past year. Don't pay any attention to the species, because that's gonna vary from area to area. But pay attention to what I've got here. I've got some species in all 4 crop types: warm and cool season broadleaves and grasses. I'm using the cover crops to get diversity into my annual cropping system to build soil health. And that's what it's about. We're trying to address those resource concerns and build soil health. So I question the rationale of some things. My neighbor's not here today, so I can talk about him. I've been on that farm since 1983. His farm is directly across the road there from me. Every fall, he goes out and digs this low spot. Has done it every fall for 31 years. This is a photo taken June 15th of 2009. I took it off the front deck of my house. The local weather service was forecasting a major rainfall event, which for us means anything over half an inch. But I took this photo. It started raining at 6:30 in the evening, and by 12 midnight, we had 13.2 inches. This is a photo of the neighbor's dug area 3 weeks later. Still had water sitting there, and this happens every year. This photo here is my cropland directly across the road from his. Immediately following, we had 4/10 more inch of rain the next day. Immediately following that 13.6 inches of rain. Do you see any erosion there? Now, I've got a little bit of bare soil in the foreground here where when you get that much rain, it's going to move a little of that residue away. Jay Fear, our district conservationist, came out and took these photos. And he says, here's a photo of the soil that day, the morning after 13.6 inches. Jay makes the claim you could have drove a floater truck or any type of equipment over that field that day without rutting it up. Look at the soil aggregation. If you have those water infiltration pores, you're going to take that water down, then you're going to hold it in the soil profile for when you need it. I mentioned when I started out in 1991, we could infiltrate 1/2 inch per hour. 2011, the last time NRCS come out and tested my soils, we can infiltrate over 8 inches an hour now. I've never seen it rain 8 inches an hour. It's not how much moisture you get, it's how healthy are your soils. Can they infiltrate it, and can they hold it and store it? That's what it's about. The fifth thing, animal impact. The fifth principle of building a healthy soil. I own this newspaper, The Prairie Farmer, from 1871. And it depicts the bison and the wolves following the bison, keeping them moving. How were soils formed? Soils were formed in conjunction with herbivores. Why don't we have that in agriculture today? We had these large herds of bison, etc., moving across the plains, and then we also had the local animals, the rabbits, grasshoppers, all these insects. They were taking this forage, the biomass, and cycling it through. Animals are an important part of a healthy ecosystem. Today, it's not uncommon to drive for thousands of miles and not even see a fence, let alone an animal. Why have we removed them from the ecosystem? And then we expect our soils to be healthy? Not going to happen. 2007, I was speaking at a conference in Brandon, Manitoba, and I got done speaking, and I had this guy in my face telling me that, boy, you see what I'm doing. And that was Neil Dennis from up there in Canada, and Neil's the mob grazer who puts up to 1 million head of livestock on an acre. I thought I was high stock density, running 200,000 to 300,000 pounds live weight per acre, till I met Neil. Well, that next spring then, I went up there and viewed his operation to see what he was doing. And the thing that amazed me is when we dug down in his soils, he was building more topsoil quicker than I was. And that bothers me, because I don't like to be second fiddle, you know? But the important thing was that I could take a lesson from Neil. And I knew immediately that Neil was doing this on perennial pastures, and I understood that. But I needed to get more animal impact onto my cropland. That was the missing link in building soil health further on my cropland. So this is our ranch today. This isn't quite all of it, but the light blue areas are cropland. The light green areas are tame grass pastures. In other words, it was tilled at one time and now is seeded back to perennials. And then the yellow area is our perennial pastures. I mentioned we had 3 pastures starting out. We now have over 100 permanent pastures, but an infinite number of smaller ones. When we took over that operation, we could run 65 cow-calf pairs and about 35 yearlings. Today we're running 350 cow-calf pairs, 400 to 800 yearling and grass-finished cattle, plus some other livestock I'll talk to you about. But why I wanted to show you with this map is to show you that we're able to integrate all three of these, the perennial natives, the perennial tame grass pastures, and the cropland. We integrate them all and graze livestock on all of them. Now, one of the easiest ways to get started into grazing animals on cropland is with fall-seeded biennials. This photo was taken here in early October. We had just harvested a crop and then went in there and seeded. In this case, it's a combination of winter triticale, a forage winter wheat, hairy vetch, sweet clover, and there's some radish in there. And it's just poking through the ground there in October, even though we froze many, many, many times before that. So what we'll do then, we'll let that go, and then the next spring, we'll mob graze high stock densities on these high carbon biennials. And we build very small paddocks. This photo I'm just using for illustration was taken on some tame grass pasture. But we'll go out there, and I don't care if you even have one animal, you can do high stock density grazing. Just make your area small enough. That's all there is. So we'll go out there in the morning and we'll roll up the previous day's paddock, set up the new days, takes about an hour. We'll use these bat latches in the lower left. Bat latches are a little solar-powered gate opener. That's a bungee cord attached to them. We punch the time in, we want that to open, and then the livestock move themselves the rest of the day, so we don't have to be there. So when we're using this as a tool, and that's all mob grazing is it's a tool, just like no-till is a tool, cover crops are a tool. These are all tools, but we'll use that to address our resource concern. And in this particular case, where we're mob grazing these fall-seeded biennials, our resource concern is trying to get more armor on the soil surface. So we let that go, that in order that cover crop get to a higher carbon state. Now, obviously for gain, if we wanted maximum gain on the livestock, we'd graze it, when it's more immature. But we want the higher carbon state. There, the bat latch just opened, and in this particular photo, there's about 675,000 pounds of live weight per acre that are moving on to the next break. And there is what we're left with. That solid mat of carbon on the soil surface, the armor that's going to protect that soil. We only want the livestock to eat about a third of the above ground biomass. What happened when the herds of bison were moving across the Great Plains? Were they eating everything? No, they were trampling way more than they were eating. But it's that biomass on the soil surface that causes nutrient cycling. It's armor to protect the soil. It's preventing from the temperatures rising. It's preventing from wind erosion and doing all these healthy things that occur in a healthy ecosystem. Then what we can do, this is a photo just 3 days later. So we were grazing this at a higher carbon state. It was already starting to form a seed head. So when we run those livestock on there, they trample it, and it's going to die. And then I don't need a herbicide, and I can go in there immediately and seed again. Now, our window growing season is not very long. I don't have time then to get a cash crop established, but I can certainly get another cover crop established in there, which is what we do. In this particular case, we're going in with a very diverse mix. It's during the warm time of the year, so we're primarily going to use warm season species. Sorghum, Sudan, millet, sunflowers, cowpeas, soybeans, that type of thing. I still add in some cool season species just because in case we get one of these cold fronts blowing through, which can happen, we'll have something that's able to cope with those temperatures. But look what I'm doing with this amount of diversity. I'm really accelerating biological time. If I would seed these as monocultures, it'd take me 20 years to accomplish what I'm able to do in 1 year. Here's the seed just poking up through the soil surface. Notice that aggregation there. I don't like this photo. There's too much bare soil, but it does show how all these seeds seeded together at the same depth do just fine. And they come up and grow just fine together. We're optimizing solar energy collection with these diverse cover crops. If you have a monoculture growing out there, how many leaf sizes and shapes do you have? One. No matter what direction that sun is from this field, I'm going to be harvesting solar energy. And that's what it's about for us as producers. We want to capture that soil energy, sequester it as carbon, and start the nutrient cycle, feed soil biology. So if we get any moisture at all, this photo was taken with about 2 inches of moisture on it, and we can get some really good growth. Remember, my soil temps are kept lower. I don't evaporate down as deep. My soils are much more efficient water use-wise than other soils. Then we have a lot of options with that cover crop. We tend to grass finish things, so we can turn some animals onto that warm season cover crop and grass finish. When we do that, we do not run near as high a stock density because we're shooting for maximum gain. We want those livestock gaining 2.5 pounds a day, and they'll do it on these warm season mixes. Or we can let it go and just let it continue to sequester carbon and to build biomass. And that's what it looks like then after a frost. Remember, extend the growing season. I used to think that, our average last frost in the spring is mid-May. First one comes in the fall, early September. I thought that narrow window was my growing season. As we've gotten a healthier soil, the biology in the soil keep the soil temperature warmer. We can easily grow species up until Thanksgiving most years. Now this year with the cold we've had, we're probably done for the year. Here's how we convert most of our cover crops to dollars though. We used to calve in February and March, which is the reason I have no hair, because it just doesn't work in North Dakota. We now calve in late May and June out on grass. We leave the calves on the cows all winter out there grazing. And they do just fine. The beauty of these cover crops is you can add so many different species and you can balance their rations. This calf here is eating hairy vetch. Hairy vetch in December will still be 18% crude protein. Their nutritional needs are met by the cover crop. Why in the world would I want to go put up hay, spend dollars? We have a motto on our operation. We want to sign the back of the check and not the front. It's a pretty good motto. It leaves a lot more in your pocket. It does. It works good. It's a lot of fun, too. Allows me to come to Idaho when I could be home working, feeding hay. I'll tell you a little story with this here. This fall, we had father-son. They had heard about our operation, traveled up for a tour. And they were explaining their operation to me. They ran 1,000 cow-calf pairs, and then they backgrounded the calves. And they said, well, we got 2 hay machines. We put up hay. We got 3 balers. We got 2 semis to haul that hay home. And then in the winter, we start 4 tractors every day to feed those 1,000 cows and their calves. And they turned to my son, and they asked him, well, what's your day like? And he says, in the winter. And he says, well, I usually get up and make some coffee, and then I sit in the recliner and watch TV. He says, my biggest problem is I wear out too many recliners. Last year, we wintered 350 cow-calf pairs. We started a tractor once. Animals have 4 legs for a reason. We don't need to provide them with a bed and breakfast. Let them find it on their own. And they prefer to do that. I honestly believe they're happier doing that than if we would confine them. When we start confining animals, we start causing more problems. And they can do it when it's real cold. That's not muskox. That's 350 cow-calf pairs grazing cover crops at over 40 degrees below zero. I actually felt a little sorry for my son as I sat in the pickup and he walked out and took this picture. But they're doing just fine, and they survive just fine. Now, part of the problem is you got to make sure you have the type of cattle that can withstand those conditions. But we do by letting nature make the selection. Then what we're able to do when we trample all that residue onto the soil surface, and remember when we're grazing in the winter, it's just like in the summer. We don't want those livestock to eat all that. We want to trample residue, but we can build topsoil. This photo here, see where the blue lines are? That's the residue, the cover crop we trampled 3 years later. That's about 3 inches of new topsoil that we're building. Now, I'm not going to call it all topsoil. It's biomass also. It's organic material laid down on top. But we're able to accelerate soil formation by using the principles of nature. Here's what I like to say. 1/3 for the critters above ground, 2/3 for those below ground. That's what it looks like in the spring then after we grazed one of these cover crops. We have that armor on the soil surface protecting the soil. I'm going to show you the fallacy of the current production model now. This particular field here, we went and took standard NP and K soil test. I know that's too small to read, but in the upper left it says pounds of nitrogen in the top 10 inches of soil, 2 feet of soil profile is 10 pounds. How many bushel corn crop can you get off 10 pounds of N? Not much, I heard. I'll show you what I can do on 10 units of N. Here we are planting into that residue. When I say I'm a no-tiller, I'm a no-tiller. On the left is planted, on the right is not. I don't use trash whippers, that's way too much tillage. Don't use row markers, too much tillage. Okay? We don't want to disturb that armor. We want that protection there. Here's photos then. I plant corn about May 15th. Here's June 16th, July 1st. Where's the residue? I'm not out there cultivating, I'll tell you that. Where's the residue going? Here's a photo of that same corn crop then at tasseling time. Dr. Ray Ward at Kearney, Nebraska, he owns Ward Labs. Him and I are friends. He used to think what I was doing was a bunch of hogwash. So he came up himself then and took these leaf tissue analysis of that corn. Every single nutrient he tested for was sufficient or above. I didn't add anything. We don't put on anything. We don't use foliars, no amendments of any kind, certainly no synthetics. So I went from that soil test that showed I only had 10 units of N to a leaf tissue analysis that shows everything supplied that that plant needs. Where does it come from? There's what that field looked like in the fall then. All that residue is gone. It's consumed by soil life. I'm embarrassed of this photo. That's bare soil. That's why I grow, this was taken back in '09. That's why I grow hairy vetch and other clovers with my corn now, because I don't ever want anyone seeing bare soil on my operation. I'm not going to say it doesn't happen, but I'm certainly going to try my hardest to prevent it from happening. There's what we did. Now, county average in Burleigh County, North Dakota is just under 100 bushels. We got 142 bushel corn crop without adding no fertilizers, no pesticides, no fungicides, no herbicides in this field. My cost to produce a bushel of corn, market it, everything is $1.44 on this crop here. $1.44 a bushel. Today's corn price, I can still make money. We don't take part in government programs anymore. No crop insurance. I don't want to be encumbered by that, and I don't want to be on government welfare. So I just refuse to take part in government programs now. We can produce more at a lower cost in this type of production model. There's no doubt about it. The soil is alive if our management allows it to be. We have to start looking at healthy ecosystems and look at what the soil needs instead of what the plant needs. Soil without biology is just geology. The reason that soil test didn't work is it only took into account the chemical and physical properties of the soil. It did not take into account all the biology that I have in my healthy soils. This gentleman here, Dr. Richard Haney at Temple, Texas, has developed a new soil test that I think will really help link the conventional production model into the more biological production model. You send a soil test in there, and Dr. Haney is measuring things like water extractable organic carbon, which is what the biology eats, and he's able to extrapolate and determine how much nutrients can you get out of your soil due to the biology, the chemical, and the physical properties. This new soil test will revolutionize soil testing in North America. There's no doubt in my mind it's being used. There's like 6 labs now. Ward Labs is one of them that does this soil test. Costs about $50 to do a test. But that'll be the link that can show producers how much they can start cutting back on their synthetics if they are using synthetics. Now, what about livestock onto soils? You know, the impact of livestock on cropland. For years I was told, Gabe, your system's going to crash. You're going to run out of phosphorus and potassium. Nitrogen's a no-brainer. Above every acre of land, we have about 34,000 tons of atmospheric nitrogen. I don't know why anyone would want to write a check for nitrogen when it's free. All you got to do is plant legumes. It just makes no sense to me. So We're not going to pay attention. Over on the left, that's nitrogen. We're not going to pay much attention to that. What this is here is this is comparing two of my fields. They both have been no-tilled a long time. They both have had very diverse crop rotations. They both have had cover crops. The only difference is the green barred field has had livestock integration 2 of the past 6 years. Nitrogen's about the same there, 86 to 90 pounds. The second bar there is inorganic phosphorus. In other words, what's available to the plant. We jumped from 65 pounds to 239 pounds. Now, how did that happen? You know, those livestock didn't bring any phosphorus with them. But what this shows is the importance of herbivores grazing on the land. Because they're grazing a living crop, that crop then, cover crop, is able to secrete more root exudates, break down more of that organic phosphorus so it can cycle through to the plants. Nature had this all figured out for thousands of years, just that we forgot about it with our stupid industrial farming model. We need to get back to the principles of nature. The third bar there is potassium, same thing, significant increase. When we start following the principles of nature, nature takes care of all this. It's so much more fun not having to write a check for this stuff now. You know? Now, I'm not going to tell you that there's not areas where there's blatant deficiencies in a nutrient, and you're not going to get this overnight. But I know one thing, there's thousands of producers using this model all over the world. It'll work anywhere. We've had visitors to our operations from all 50 states and 16 foreign countries now. I've had groups from South Africa and England and Denmark and Australia who are all doing the same thing. I haven't found anywhere in the world where there's production agriculture that this model won't work, because it's simply the model that nature provided. My son took this photo a few years back, and I just love it. That's our cattle in the foreground. That's the neighbor in the background. Which is going to put more dollars in your pocket? Here's a young man who first heard Ray Archuleta and I speak 4 years ago, Michael Thompson down in Kansas. His dad was pretty hesitant, and he says, well, Michael, I'll tell you this much. We'll take that field. I'm going to farm half of it my way. You farm half of it your way. This is after 4 years. Look at the difference in soils. That's Michael's on the left. That's his father's half of the field on the right. Which one has more carbon? Which one has higher organic matter? Which one has more soil life? Which one has more aggregation, more infiltration? That's an amazing photo. We can change soils in a very short time with diversity, animal impact. It works. We've seen a real upward trend in organic matter levels on our operation. I mentioned we were less than 2% when we started. We're 5.3 to 6.1% now. And this has taken me a lot of years to learn all these things. I'm a slow learner. But guys like Michael, who try things a lot faster than I did, they're going to make even more rapid advances. Now, what's the value of that? Take a look at organic matter levels, and then you can start extrapolating out the amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur in your soils. A 1% organic matter soils has about $751 per acre of those nutrients in it. My 5% organic matter soils, I'm over $3,700 of nutrients in there. Back when I used to you have to use a banker, I went to him and I said, I want to put that on my balance sheet. And he said, well, I can't do that. And I said, why? You allow Joe to prepay fertilizer, put it on there. He says, you got a point. Now I no longer use a banker, and it's a lot more fun. Now, in your dry environment here, I'm going to run through this little analogy, the importance of water holding capacity of soils. When I started out, I have silt loam soils, so the middle column there. Less than 2% organic matter. I could only hold a little under 2 inches of moisture per foot of the soil profile. So in a 4-foot soil profile, I could hold a little under 8 inches of water. Today, I'm well over 5%. I can hold over 20 inches of water. We only get 15 inches on the average per year. I can hold all the moisture that falls on our operation. It's not how much moisture you get, it's how much you use. 2 weeks ago, I was in southeastern Missouri, in the Delta region. They get over 50 inches of annual precipitation, and they're applying 50 inches plus of irrigated water to produce 200 bushel corn. Well, I put together a slide. I showed you my yields. I'm producing about just under 9.5 bushels of corn per inch of water. They were producing barely 2. I showed them. I said, if you had my water use efficiency, you'd be producing 950 bushel corn, right? Very inefficient system they have. It doesn't make sense. They cannot compete production-wise with what we can do with healthy soils. Okay, so for 1% organic matter in the top 6 inches of the soil profile, you'll hold about 27,000 gallons of water. These are approximately, okay? There's a few variables in there. So in 1993, when I started our 5,000 acre ranch, we could hold 256,500,000 gallons of water. That sounds like a lot, but today we can hold over 810 million gallons of water. That's huge. Think of the ramifications. Now, let's carry that out even further. Understand there's a reservoir called Hubbard Reservoir near you. It's 4,060 acre feet. It'll hold about 1,322,955,000 gallons of water. At the rate we're improving our organic matter on our farm, we're going to be over 10% pretty soon. In other words, our 5,000 acre ranch will hold more water than the Hubbard Reservoir will. That's the potential each of you as producers has. I don't care what scale you're talking about, whether you're talking about a 1/4 acre urban vegetable farm, or whether you're talking a large ranch, the water holding capacity is up to you. Don't blame it on drought or how much rain falls. We all have the ability to change our soils. Soil carbon, then, is the key driver for the nutritional status of plants, and it is the key driver for moisture holding capacity. In other words, soil carbon is the key driver for farm profit. Any farm you go on, that's going to be the key driver for farm profit. All living things are based on carbon. We have to start thinking of our operations in terms of carbon. I'm going to show you now, just if you don't think I'm crazy by now, I'm going to prove it to you. Okay? Me and David Brandt, who I showed you a picture of, and Gail Fuller down in Kansas, we have a contest every year to see who can do the craziest thing. Well, I got thinking about cover crops, and then I got thinking about my garden. And first I'll talk a little bit about, I had some potato growers there, and they said, Gabe, it's all well and good what you're doing, but we're potatoes growers, we can't do it no-till. So I thought about that one winter. So this is my no-till potatoes. We lay down a little layer of compost, and you can see the potato seed. We just lay it on top. Then we fire up a tractor, roll a round bale of alfalfa hay over it, come back in the fall, peel back the alfalfa hay, and there's our potatoes. We can do it no-till. It's easy, it works good. You got to be a little careful of the thickness of the hay. Potatoes aren't going to be quite as large, but it's sure a lot easier to pick potatoes this way, and they're clean and they're healthy. Now, what I did for the garden was we took 30 species of vegetables, 20 species of annual flowers, 20 species of cover crop seed, mixed them all together, put them in the drill, and seeded 30 acres. That's our garden. It was absolutely fantastic. The wife had asked me, what do you want for supper? Whatever I tripped over, that's what we were eating. In the middle there, that's the potatoes we harvested. You know, we're dry land, don't have any water, any moisture to irrigate with, but we don't have to because we're taking advantage of the biology in the soils and the natural ecosystem in the soils, the mycorrhizal fungi moving those nutrients and that water. Works fantastic. We took all we wanted and then donated the rest to needy families, and it's a good project. Then after that, we ran the grass-finished beef on there. We ran the poultry on there. Worked extremely well. We're stacking enterprises. Vandana Shiva said this, in nature's economy, the currency is not money, it is life. So think of what I was doing when I had this 70 species mix. I'm adding as much life as possible to those soils. I had as much biological impact on those soils in 1 year as it would if it would have took 70 years if I would have planted them all as monocultures. We're accelerating biological time. That's all we're doing. On our operation then, it's about feeding the whole. We want to feed everything. We don't look at everything as independent. One of the things we do is we spend a lot of time paying attention to insects. On all the cover crops and annual crops we grow, we want species flowering at all times because they're going to attract both the pollinator insects and the predator insects. I mentioned that I haven't used an insecticide since before the turn of the century. There's no need because we give a home to all the predator insects. They're going to take care of all the pests. Good friend of mine, Dr. Jonathan Lundgren, he's an entomologist at ARS in Brookings, South Dakota, told me this. For every one insect species that's a pest, there's 1,700 that are either beneficial or indifferent. So as producers, we're focused on killing that one pest. Meanwhile, we're killing everything else that could take care of that one pest. Makes absolutely no sense. Sign the back of the check, not the front. We also have to focus on the life in the soil. All that biology that's in the soil, because that's what drives nutrient cycling. We also have a tremendous amount of wildlife on our operation. We're located now in city jurisdiction. The city of Bismarck's one of the fastest growing metropolitan areas in the U.S. We have a huge wildlife population on our ranch. The wildlife knows where they have a healthy home. Now, I'm not going to get into livestock very much today. I'm going to speed through this on account of time. But on our operation, we run 350 cow-calf pairs. We have 400 to 800 stocker cattle. We run these together to try and mimic the native ecosystem, what it was. You know, there's no longer bison where we're at. My neighbors would get upset if bison were drinking out of their swimming pool, so I gotta mimic that how I can. So we have cattle. We have sheep, but we run those broilers then out on these cover crops. Works extremely well. As layers, this is Paul's version of Joel's eggmobile. Paul takes these old stock trailers and he tears the floor out of them, puts wire mesh in them, an S-box, and we pull them around where we have the grass-finished animals and they take care of the fly problems. Spread that cattle manure out. Works fantastic. It's taking advantage of what would occur in a natural ecosystem. Most of our grain gets sold to other producers who want to buy healthy grains. We've been non-GMO now for 6 years, 7 years, something like that. We're not certified organic simply because I don't believe I should have to pay somebody to certify what I already know. We prefer to self-certify. Our ranch is open to our customers at all times. They can come and anytime they want and see what we're doing. What we're trying to do with all these species then is to harvest different levels of energy. You know, Pete made a point about feeding 9 billion people by the year 2050. In this type of a production model, it is absolutely no problem. I'm producing cash grains and I've got all these different other enterprises on top of that. I will produce way more calories per acre than any standard conventional production model of monocultures. There's no way they can produce as many calories per acre as I can. Feeding the world is no problem if we change our mindset. We as producers must also remember that we are in the business of producing nutrition. Our decisions greatly affect human health. You know, the United States spends more on healthcare than any other country in the world, yet we're the 42nd healthiest country in the world. We're first in cancer, ADD, ADHD, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, autoimmune diseases, obesity, and the list goes on and on. Why is that? I'm not going to blame it all on producers, don't get me wrong, but we as producers have to take our share of the blame for that. We have to start focusing on producing nutrition instead of just yield. That's one thing we're really focused on our operation now is tying soil health into human health. We're starting to do a lot of nutrient testing of the products we're producing so we can back up that statement. That's our own trademark logo, Nourished by Nature. That's because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to provide nutrition to people through the natural ecosystems. Here's our meat trailer. We're direct marketing to consumers. We thought we were pretty isolated in Bismarck, North Dakota there. We can't even begin to keep up with demand right now. We never expected the onslaught that we received. There's nothing more gratifying than handing somebody a steak. They give you $20 a pound and they thank you for it. That is a good feeling. You know, I can live with that. So here's what we've done on our operation. Starting on the left in 1993, we had shallow soils, 1.7% organic matter. We started to no-till. Then in 95, we started to diversify the cash crop rotation. We noticed an uptick in our organic matter. 1997, we really started focusing on cover crops and how do we get cover crops on all of our cropland acres. Another jump in soil health. 2006, then we really started planting the multi-species cover crops. And then we started adding mob grazing and integrating all these different livestock species on the land. Each one of those things we did, we saw a marked improvement in the health of our land, in the health of the ecosystem, in the water holding capacity. And now here in 2013, we have a plot of land that we've now risen to 11.1% organic matter using these principles. We can improve soil health much, much faster than we used to think possible. It's just a matter of following the principles of nature. If you have healthy soil, you're going to have clean water, you're going to have clean air, you're going to have healthy plants, healthy animals, and healthy people. And that's what it's about on our operation. How do we produce a healthy ecosystem and equate it to healthy humans? So, with that, there's my contact information. Feel free to contact me or my son at any time. We'd be happy to visit with you.